friend Tom from Orange County.
I'm Tom, I'm an alcoholic. Grateful to be sober, and I know I'm sober today because I found a power greater than myself that has done for me what I couldn't do for myself through the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and by virtue of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And because of that, I'm grateful for an absolute truth, and that is, of myself I am nothing. The Father doeth the works. I'm in touch with the Creator, and for that, I'm grateful. What a great weekend. Thank you to the committee, Angela and Darren. Darren, thanks for inviting me to participate. I don't necessarily fit in with the crew that you put up here. You're so sharp looking, and you got Pat over here, and Chris, you guys all got these nice hairdo, and I don't look like you guys. I got, and Jennifer was beautiful, and I'm going to come up here and kind of bring it down a little bit. The big book says that the alcoholic, more than most, leads a double life. And, the kind of double life I left is I always thought of myself as kind of this. I had an awakening a couple years ago. There's, one of the promises is that more will be revealed. Well, what's revealed isn't always that, up on the mountaintop kind of an experience. Sometimes it takes us to a different place. And I always had this experience of myself as kind of like being this mysterious, shadowy, maybe a James Bond type, double agent, kind of hard to figure out. And a couple years ago, one of my sponsees, who was a professional photographer, was out he took candid pictures and got one. I didn't know this, but he posted on Facebook and he puts, "What a nerd," a picture of me. And I look at this thing, and how rude. And I looked at it closely and I realized, holy crap, I'm just a nerd. So you're not, you got, these exciting, cool things. And what you're going to get from me is kind of nerd stuff. I'm a product of the 70s, born in 1957, and I should probably do something. Darren mentioned to me that I should pay attention to the time, if for no other reason to give the newcomer hope that I'm going to stop. And I got to sit with Nisi here, and we have friends, and then she made the comment, "What a small world." And I remember doing that with one of my mentors, Howard P. I remember I met Howard over in Arizona, and I lived down in Dana Point, and Howard's from West Los Angeles, and over in Dana Point, we're riding around in my friend Terry's van, and we're talking about all our common connections, and I say to Howard, "Man, what a small world." And if you know Howard's kind of this rocket scientist, actually a rocket scientist. And he goes, "Well, no, Tom, it's not small. In fact, it's nearly infinitely large. It's just perfectly ordered." And to see what's going on here today, I want to thank the committee, thank the speakers, thank everybody who's participated. There is a perfect order going on here. And I think what's connected is, there's a spirit of kindness here. Bill wrote in the 12 and 12 that our most cherished quality is unity. And I believe unity is the product of love. Our 12-step says that joy is the theme. The joy of living is the theme of our 12-step, and action is its keyword. But when the 12-step is seen in its full implication, what we're really talking about is love that's beyond price. And it's deeply apparent to me that in the Santa Barbara AA community, that there's a deep level of love. There's awakened spirits who are doing this thing, who are bringing in, our love works two ways. It's that we know what it's like to be the hopeless alcoholic who's dying of this thing. Congratulations, Ray. It's good to see you here. I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad you came up here and got that book, and then there's that, frequent contact with each other and newcomers is the bright spot of our lives, the big book says. But, so there's that love of being together and on this. We are people who normally would not mix. It's so apparent as you were doing the countdown that we are people who normally would not mix. We're from all different worlds, and all different. Yet, God somehow, with the golden thread, stitches our lives together and allows us to sit in a place like this and have the experiences that we have, and allows us, through those experiences, to have a little bit of healing at depth, that place where the thirst is drawn to. The thirst originates in this brokenness I have deep down inside of me. And I sit with you guys, and God heals a little bit of that at a time. And, there's that, what's the Japanese pottery that when it's broken, they heal it, they fix it with gold. So that, those broken wounds, cling to the thought that in God's hands, our dark past may be our greatest asset, the very thing that can bring life and happiness to others and avert death and misery for some. So, I'm grateful to be up here. I know today that, it's an absolute miracle to be a part of Alcoholics Anonymous, to be a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous, living with a contented, useful life. I had no reason to become an alcoholic other than the fact that, I had 7 DUIs. I've got a brother that had 6 DUIs. He's 26 years sober. I've got another brother who had 5 DUIs, and he's not sober. And, I had a dad that was an alcoholic and a mom that was an alcoholic. And I've got a couple daughters that are alcoholics. So I guess there's something in there. When my oldest daughter got her first DUI, we were kind of excited she had joined the club, but then she got bizarre. And my dad was a fighter pilot, and my mom was a housewife, and we moved a lot. By the time I was 12, by the time I was 10, I was in my fifth home. And that's not a lot, but it's uncomfortable to move. You always have to kind of like recreate yourself and make yourself get ready for the new people, and so I began at an early age to adapt myself to what I believed it is that you wanted me to be. And that's a struggle, because I'm never really quite sure what it is you want me to be, but I have to have that assurance in order to present what I believe it is you need me to be. And so there's always this struggle. And I love what Chris was talking about yesterday, this sense of being, in Bill's story, when he talks about what alcohol did for him and what it does to him, those are really important things to discover. If you're new here, what does alcohol do for you and what does it do to you? The first thing it does for him, he says, in the midst of the excitement, I discovered liquor. I was part of life at last. My mind, this problem that centers in my mind, separates me from the experience of being here right now, because I'm always filtering everything that happens, new people I meet, every situation that happens. I'm filtering it through this prism of, what does this mean for me? How am I supposed to react to this? And so I end up missing the moment. I'm always about a half a beat off from the moment. And I would tell you what alcohol does for me is it puts me right in the moment. It removes that barrier, and I feel like I'm in tune with the universe. Anyway, my dad was a fighter pilot, mom was a housewife, and I'm the oldest of 6 kids. And like Jennifer mentioned yesterday, everything was great until that second one came along. And after that third one, I started to realize, because I'm kind of a community-minded person, I want things to get along. One of the strategies I developed in life was trying to be able to fix things, and I realized that all this crying and screaming and all this stuff would be fixed if these little ones would just stop doing. And maybe if I held a pillow over their faces while they're. I remember having these thoughts that I could just help mom out, and there'd be a lot less chaos, and be a lot more attention for me. And anyway, Dad was a fighter pilot, and we end up in Chicago, living with my mom's mom when Dad goes to Vietnam. He's flying these fighter jets that were kind of ill-suited for the mission they were being used for, and he was a F-105 fighter bomber, and he was a wild weasel. And when it was a new mission, because the air technology had changed, and what was happening is about half of those planes were getting shot down. Half of those pilots were ending up dead, MIA, or POW. And at the time, I was like 10 years old, living in Chicago. I haven't got this newspaper route, so I'm delivering newspapers. And one of the things I would do, as I folded those newspapers, and as I would read them, usually the headlines, and I would see these headlines. And we watched a lot of TV. When I wasn't watching McHale's Navy F Troop or Gilligan's Island, I Dream of Jeannie a lot. I wish I could have watched reruns back then. We would see the news. And in the news, what I would see is like these peace marches. We lived in Chicago in 1967 through 69. It was a crazy era. 1968, Robert Kennedy gets assassinated. Martin Luther King gets assassinated. The city of Chicago goes up in flames with the Democratic conventions. We got caught in one of these things. Mom's driving the station wagon with 6 kids, and little screaming ones in the back, and me up in the front. And I remember just seeing terror in my mom's face. And what would happen is, so I'm reading about these peace marches. I'm reading about, and it makes sense to me, but at the same time, I'm the oldest son, and so I used to be able to hang out with Mom and Dad, and go, Dad, and when he would sit and talk to his friends at the officers club, and they'd drink, and they'd tell their stories, and they were my heroes. And I knew that they were doing over there doing what they were supposed to be doing. Yet, how it was being experienced in our household was that, some days we'd come home and there'd be this like kind of a deathly silence. Maybe it might be Mom crying on the phone, or it might be Mom talking to her mom about something, and maybe it's just another one of Dad's friends has gone down, and one of Mom's friends' husbands is now MIA, dead, or POW, and this kind of like fear started to take over my life. There was a confusion that I could never reconcile about how life was supposed to go. And I looked to the adults, and they didn't seem to have the answers because they were all messed up too. We got some people fighting, you got fires, you got all this crazy stuff. And I would be up at night, and I would be laying in we had a little bedroom with 2 sets of bunk beds in it for the 4 boys. And I'm the oldest, and I'd be laying on that bottom bunk bed, and I'd be chewing on that, just biting the pillow, so my brothers couldn't hear me crying, because I'd be so full of fear that and I'm supposed to be the man of the house. Dad had said, and I know I can't do this thing, and I know I can't do this. There's too much. Life is way too big. It's coming at me from too many angles, and I'd be gripped by that thing, and I wouldn't be able to sleep, and I'd go to the school in the morning, and I remember not being able to look at the other kids in the eyes, because they knew, they could see where the tears had been burning streaks in my cheeks, and they knew I'd be crying all night, and they all seemed to be handling things pretty well. Even my brothers and sisters seemed to be handling things pretty well, versus the way I felt on the inside. And so when I got to, Dad came back, and we ended up in a great assignment in Hawaii, and I met some friends, and the first thing we started doing was broke some windows in the school, and then we did a little glue sniffing, and as time went on, we started doing that thing where you would hold your breath and jump up and get knocked out and go flopping on the ground, and I started to enjoy life, and one of them made this arrangement. He says, "Hey, we're going to go camping, and we want you to go with us, but we're gonna steal some booze from the officers club. Are you up for this?" I said, "Oh, you bet I am." And I had drank before. In fact, I drank enough to get a little bit of buzz, but this time we're gonna kind of like do it as an adventure. And these are my best buddies now. And of course, at the same time, I want to fit in, just like the way Pat described. And so we steal that booze, and we go out in the field, and something happened to me that night when I got drunk. I was 12 years old. And it's like those contradictions, that interior confusion, it just kind of melted away. And then I got filled with a sense of, like, I can do this. I remember having this conscious thought that I just found the Green Hornet's secret key, that I can do life with this thing. I've got the key. But I also kind of overshot the mark, and I got in a little bit of trouble, some bloody nose, some puke, and urine. I'm hoping it was my urine, but there's no way to know, because I was in a blackout. And so 2 things happened to me that night. One is I experienced, what Jennifer described last night as the craving of alcoholism, the thirst, this unquenchable thirst. The more I drank, the thirstier I got. And the other is that I experienced at a deep level a solution that I didn't think was possible. I didn't even know I had the problems that alcohol solved. And it's like, Pat even mentioned this. It began for me like when life happened, it's like a neon sign would kind of flash on the inside of me, and it said, "A drink will fix this. Liquor, liquor, liquor." And I began my journey. So at age 12 was my first drunk. I get sober at almost age 44. So for 32 years, what alcohol does for me blinds me to what it does to me. And I'll just give you a thumb sketch of what it does to me. What it does to me is I end up getting arrested 48 times. I have 7 DUIs, as I mentioned. I lose every hope and dream that's created. All of that is taken one drink at a time. 5 years later, I'm a good athlete. I'm involved in that stuff. I love participating in that. Mom and Dad I never doubted that I never had a worry about whether I was loved and wanted. I always knew from the very beginning I was loved and wanted. That wasn't my issue. Nothing came to me from my parents other than, they liked alcohol, and there were sometimes some fights and stuff like that. But what I got from them was love. I got from them a clear understanding of how important education was. Here's what I know about alcoholism. This is kind of crazy. Is I knew by the time I was in 3rd grade how important it was to help other people. I had wonderful examples of that, and I understood the teachings, and I knew that how important it was to pray and meditate. My grandparents were active members of the church, and my grandmother was a contemplative. She would sit quietly, and I knew that there was a peace that came from that stuff. I knew that the biggest room in my life was the room for improvement. I knew how important a daily inventory was to grow. I knew that if I harmed somebody, if I caused a problem, that I needed to fix it. I knew that stuff. I knew the principles that are contained within the steps by the time I was in 3rd grade. And I had examples of people doing that stuff. But I lacked something. I lacked the power to do that stuff because I've got a mind that's always looking for a shortcut. I'm looking for an easier, softer way. And, at age 12, when I discovered alcohol, I didn't have to do the hard work that it takes to overcome the condition of being human. We all suffer from this condition of being human, this constant inner talk, this thing that takes place. But normal people don't get the solution that we get. At age 12, I no longer had to work on that stuff. I no longer had to do the hard work of growing up. I did because I could get a buzz immediately, and that stuff would just disappear. By age 17, I'm drinking a lot, but I'm also performing well in sports. I'm okay in academics, and I was a high-level performer on a basketball team, and our team was ranked 2nd or 3rd in the state, and we were going to the state playoffs. I was like the 3rd or 4th leading scorer in the state, and I loved it. I loved playing sports. I loved being part of a group committed to a common purpose, and with structure and all this. And what ends up happening is the week before the state playoffs start in Colorado, they would do the wrestling playoffs, the state wrestling playoffs. So the coach, we do our practice on Wednesday, Friday, says, you guys can go up to Denver and watch the state playoffs. So me and a couple buddies, we go up to Denver, but we got some beers and whiskey on the way up, and I overshot the mark. I end up in a blackout on the main wrestling match, screaming at the referee about what's going on, and so I get kicked off the basketball team the week before the state playoffs, and of course it's all their fault. It's all nobody understands me, and so the next semester I have a scholarship to the University of Southern Colorado to play football, and I play football there, and I'm having the best time of my life. I'm just not doing any schoolwork, but I'm having a great time. And after the season's over, the coach calls me and 2 other guys into the office, and he tells us we're not getting our scholarships renewed because of all the reports of fighting and drinking and drug use in the dorms, and so I lose this football scholarship. And so my alcoholism is starting to catch my attention because I'm starting to recognize that there's a problem. And earlier I realized that what you do when you have a problem with something is you just work harder at it. If I need to study, if I need to learn something, I just study hard. If I need to get better at sports, I just practice hard, work hard. And that was my approach towards alcoholism. If I would just work at it harder, and I found out that in our book Alcoholics Anonymous, and the more about alcoholism, there's a litany of ways we use to try to control and enjoy our drinking. And back in the 70s, one of the ways that assisted us in enjoying and controlling our drinking was drug use, and I would do that stuff. And so after I get kicked off, I decide I'm not going to stay at the University of Southern Colorado in Pueblo. I'm going to go to the University of Colorado. And I go to the university, I apply, I get in there, and the spring semester, I walk on the baseball team, and I make the baseball team. So to kind of give you a sense that I was pretty good at this stuff, and I'm supposed to start. The coach was really impressed with what I was doing, and I was supposed to start against Oklahoma State on a Tuesday. And I remember this so clear. This is one of those things where Bill says ominous warning or failed to heed. There was a lot of those ominous warnings. But anyway, I'm not going to mess this up. So it's about 10 in the morning. The game doesn't until 2:30. I'm leaving the dorm, heading out over to the CU field house, and as I'm going to get over there, I'm bringing some books. I'm going to do a little bit of studying. I'm going to stretch, get ready, and be there because I'm excited about this because I'm going to prove to myself and to others that I'm not a mess up, that I'm not a screw up, those are just isolated occurrences, and that I'll prove to the world I was important, is what Bill says. And I'm walking out the dorm and looking down one of in the dorm rooms, and there's a guy hitting on a bong. And I kind of look at him and I hear it, and he looks at me and says, "You want one of these?" And the thought occurred to me that I was really nervous about playing baseball that day. And I thought to myself, yeah, I'll just do one of those and calm me down. I'll be over there. So I sit down at about 2 o'clock. I remember looking at my watch, and I thought to myself, this was the thought that alcohol gave me: I don't want to play baseball anyway. This stuff, from the very first time I got drunk, it was alcohol deciding what I was going to do and where I was going to do it, and when I was going to do it, and how I was going to do it, who I was going to do it with, and I didn't know any of that stuff. I didn't know any of that stuff until I came to Alcoholics Anonymous and sat down in the rooms with you guys and started hearing your guys' story, and then started doing the work that's outlined in the book Alcoholics Anonymous, and start having my own experience, and then come back to you and listen to what you guys have to say about it and share this with another person. And, this thing starts to happen. The doctor's opinion says something along the lines of that in order for us to recreate our lives, our ideals must be grounded in a power greater than ourselves. I think there's two important things in there: recreating our lives and grounding our ideals in a power greater than myself. And so that's kind of what I'm going to talk about, is where that happens. So, I quit school. I'm out for a while. I'm making lots of money. I've discovered that my design for living, which is drinking and using drugs a lot, isn't an easy occupation. It takes money, and so you've got to come up with it. Either you're stealing it or you're earning it. And so I quit. And you can't do that while you're in school. So I quit school, and I'm doing that. And finally, I get laid off from a construction job, and I'm disappointed. So I go down to Arizona State, and I finish up, and I get an accounting degree because I don't want to be the person getting laid off anymore, because it's really inconvenient, especially when you own the drug dealer's money and you can't pay your bars, and you're getting kicked out of all the bars in 86 from everywhere I go. And Pat asked about if there were any bedwetters out there. I wasn't a bedwetter, but I'm told that I do things like pee on coffee tables in the middle of parties, or pee in a sink, or in the corner. And like I said, those are third-party reports. I wasn't witnessing it. So I go down to Arizona State, and I get a degree in accounting, and I come to say I also get my teeth kicked out. That's another thing. I wrecked a couple more cars, and alcohol continues to do its job. I love the idea of what does the craving mean? It means I've got a thirst that's unquenchable. When I drink, I get thirsty. The more I drink, the thirstier I get. That's not what happens with water. I'm 66 years old, and I've been told by the doctors, and I understand it to be that I should probably drink a gallon of water a day. That's a lot of 8-ounce glasses of water, and it takes a lot of work to do that. But if I drink a beer, I'm no problem. You've got 36 beers, a fifth of tequila, and an ounce of cocaine in my pocket, and I don't have any problem, because the more I drink, the thirstier I get, and then I keep on drinking. And what alcohol does is it does its job. It's a central nervous system depressant, and as I drink, I get drunk, and drunk things happen. And all those drunk things they usually involve things like police and disappointed people, and confusion and incomprehensible demoralization, pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. So I just figured out what I needed to do what I'd seen my parents do, and that is have a loving family. But I needed a wife to do that, and so I married my brother's girlfriend. It's not that bad. I got her pregnant first. And so I tried to start that thing, have a family and try to do this thing that I saw my family do, have those experiences at the dinner table where we talk about what school was like during the day and what we're doing. And unfortunately, I'm an alcoholic, and we just can't get to that point. And so I build up a bright outlook for my life, and I tear it down with a senseless series of sprees. Over and over, this stuff happens. And, we have a couple beautiful daughters, and at the same time, she's trying to help me, but she doesn't have Al-Anon. And what she ends up doing is that, at some point, she gets sick. And she goes in for mental care, and in that mental care, she comes to her senses, and she realizes that maybe she needs to be divorced from me, and so she divorces me. And I fight about that. I'm not real happy because I'm starting to have some financial success. I came out I got a degree in accounting, became a CPA, became an owner of a construction company with my brother, and we started to have some success and started to appear to the world that things were okay. But at the same time, I've just got this inner life that's just always in turmoil. And so I fight about this divorce, and I've only got one tool, and that's manipulation. Two tools: manipulation and deceit. And they work good for contracting, but they're not so good for. So I use the tools that I have, and she's been dealing with some psychiatric stuff that's arisen as a result of being exposed to a hopeless alcoholic. And so I use that stuff, that she's been unavailable and she can't take care of the kids. And so I fight over the kids so I don't have to just split the assets equally. And when I get awarded primary physical custody of the kids, I just watch the life drain out of that beautiful lady's face. Thank God, alcohol doing for me, God doing for me what I couldn't, both alcohol and God doing for me what I couldn't do for myself. By that time, I had gotten about 5 DUIs, but I was keeping them all secret, and I would have different attorneys working on them, and in different counties. I got this juggling act, all these things in the air about it. And after the decision was made by the judge about primary physical custody, I got sentenced to my first 6-month stint in a correctional facility. And so I had to go away, and I wasn't able to take care of the kids anymore, so the kids got to where they needed to be, and that was with their mom. And so I did my first 6 months locked up, and I ended up doing 2 years locked up before I get sober. I do end up doing some more time later, but when I am sober, it's a 9-step thing. I get out, and now I've got no kids to worry about, no wife to worry about, a business that's doing pretty good, but I've still got issues like with people and employees and customers, and I don't do a real good job with that. I'm pretty good for about 3 innings, but after about that, I kind of lose interest. I get distracted by shiny things, and I move on, and so I destroy it with alcohol, with another drunk, and at this point, once you get in the DUI system, it's a problem. It's at least inconvenient. But I had a hooker girlfriend, and she showed me how it wasn't really. It was more about I was trying to save her, and I think. And she reintroduced me to powerful stimulants, and I would do these powerful stimulants, and I stopped blacking out, and I stopped getting those blackout DUIs. It introduced a new issue, and that's psychosis. But psychosis is just something you deal with. It just means life's coming at you from a lot more. Much of the stuff I most vividly recall may not have happened, based on the reports I hear. Anyway, I kind of give you an idea. One night I was out. I had done a perimeter check. Everything seemed to be in place, and it was like 3 or 4 in the morning, and I lived in Colorado Springs near the base of Cheyenne Mountain, about 10 miles from Cheyenne Mountain. And Cheyenne Mountain actually houses a military facility. It's a NORAD military facility. And so one night I'm out, and I see the spaceship come down. I've seen it before, but this time it comes down, and it locks onto the streetlight right in front of my house. And I'm thinking, oh, I wonder what it's up to. Because I mentioned before, I'm a community-minded person, and I'm wondering, what's this about and nobody seems to care. I don't know if it's like sucking the energy out of the world or data mining. Who knows what it was doing, because they've got technology way beyond what we can understand. And so I grabbed an axe, and I went into action, and I started chopping that thing down, and it takes off, and I'm thinking to myself, I shouldn't have pawned the chainsaw, because I got a few more of these to cut down. So I get a wedge on one side, I whip to the other side, I swing the axe, I hit the conduit that carries the power up from the ground to the light, and it sparks out. The lights go down in the neighborhood, and now I'm chopping away in the dark, and doing as good as a vodka swilling crackhead could do, and one of those utility trucks shows up, and they've got the spotlight, and they get the spotlight on me, and I was probably wearing a tank top and boxer shorts, because that would be my usual uniform, and I don't remember if I had my teeth in or not. I usually left them in the house because I found out if I lost them outside, I couldn't find them. And so what ended up happening after this is anytime the utilities personnel would show up at my house, and they showed up a lot, mostly to turn off the electricity, turn off the gas, turn off the water, and if I managed to get some money together, scrape together, they'd come to turn it back on. And they always brought the police with them. And finally, one time I said, why do you guys bring the police with them? Because they'd bring the police, and I'd have a warrant, and I'd end up getting arrested, and it's just kind of like this crazy cycle. And I said, why do you bring them with you? Can we just work this out ourselves? And he says, we have procedure, and the note in the file says the owner is unpredictable and easily provoked. It must bring police assistance. And this goes on. And so I get to a place where I'm drinking all the time. I had a fight with my brother. He ends up buying me out of the construction company, so I've got a lot of money. And I'm up in the trees in the yard in the back, and I was doing I was researching because there were some little guys that would they would climb up them, and I was up there trying to see if I could get in touch with them. But I got visited by the dead members of the Grateful Dead. It was a big deal. So while I was there, they talked to me, and they informed me that I was going to be part of a movement. In fact, I was an important part of this movement that was going to reunify humanity in love, peace, togetherness, maybe some dance and music, and what's going to happen. And that my role was to be the reincarnation of Jerry Garcia. This is after Jerry had died. So I didn't believe them because I'm a cynic, but they proved it to me, and I made it. For several months, they would offer me these ideas, or they'd ask me these questions, and I might be drinking vodka up in the attic, reading these old Wall Street journals from the 70s, and there's the answer. And I said, oh, God, or I might pull a book off a shelf and open the book, and out of the page would be the very thing that they had just said. And pretty soon, I became convinced that, yeah, this is going to happen. And so I went on board. And so for like the last 5 years, I was fully engaged in becoming the reincarnation of Jerry Garcia. And just to report, it didn't go very well, and we are screwed. In the midst of all that stuff, so I'd be up for 5-6 days in a row, and I'd crash up 5-6 days in a row, and sometimes I'd have those just moments of complete despair where nothing would fix it. And one time I just had this thought: what I need is some father-daughter time. And I went and kidnapped my youngest daughter. I didn't know it was a kidnapping at the time. I thought I was simply taking her camping, and but there were restraining orders against me being there, and my oldest daughter saw me, and she went to another neighbor's house. So anyway, I take Brycey down. She's 8. She comes running. She's jumping. I said, you want to go camping? She says, yeah. And I call it a kidnapping now because her mom called it a kidnapping, and the authorities called it a kidnapping. And we go my goal is to teach her how to fish, spend some time, do a little bit of hiking in the mountains, do the kinds of things that I believe that fathers and daughters should do, have that kind of experience. But I'm hopeless at this point. I'm out of my mind, hopeless. This is 4 years before I get sober. And we're down the mountains near Crestone. Crestone was an important part. I knew I'd be up at night. She'd be sleeping, and there was like alien sightings there, and I needed to kind of had some questions that needed to be asked. So I was making myself available. But the first day, I don't know what you're like, but here's what it was like for me. In order for me at that point to be able to give somebody 5 minutes of quality time within an hour, it takes me like 55 minutes to get right. It takes 55 minutes of smoking, drinking, shooting up, whatever it is, to get to that place where it feels like I can communicate normally with a human. And so we take off with the fishing poles. We're going to go up to the creek. We get about 5 minutes up the trail. You know what? We got to go back. And so I take her back. She sits in the RV. We go 5 minutes to another place, take her back. 5 minutes to another place, take her back. And at some point I crash, because that's what happens to me. I can be up 5-6 days in a row, and it's not like I choose to go to sleep and I put my head on a pillow. That's not what happens. I just crash. It doesn't matter where I'm at, and I crash. And this poor little 8-year-old girl doesn't know if I'm dead or alive. And when my eyes finally open, She sees me and she jumps back terrified. She's got big eyes, and what I see is this dirty, tear-streaked face, matted hair. And she squeaks out one little thing. She squeaks out, "Dad, can I at least have some dinner?" You know, there's a line in our big book, and it's on page 18, and it talks about our illness. It says that our illness there's nothing like it. And if one has cancer, all are sorry. Not so with the alcoholic illness, because with it goes annihilation of all things worthwhile in life. It engulfs all whose lives touch the sufferers. We can go on. It's misunderstandings, fierce resentments, financial insecurity, disgusted friends and employers, sad wives and parents. But there's that line. And when I first saw this, and when I got sober, and somebody was showing me the big book, this thing jumped out at me and just grabbed me, and it said, "Warped lives of blameless children." I had no idea that, I was of the mind, and I do know that one of the things that alcoholism does is it removes my ability to care, because I cared, but as I drank, I didn't care. My mantra was, "I don't care." But the problem with that mantra for somebody that, and we all care. We have a part of us that can't not care. I believe that's the great reality deep within every man, woman, and child, is this thing that does care. That's why when we get connected, there's something going on. And so if I'm trying to convince myself with this mantra that I don't care, I continue to separate myself from the truth of who I am. And the truth of who I am is somebody grounded in a power greater than myself, where that ability to love and care lives. And I've got to believe about myself that I can't. And so the farther I get from that, the more warped and the more sick I get. And the more I need to drink. And there's nothing else I can do about that. I'll just jump to this. September 5th, 2001. I had drank a half a fifth of vodka. I'd shot up a bunch of stuff. I'd pushed all the pipes that I had. I'd gone through all the baggies. There's nothing left. And I got hit with a moment of clarity this moment of clarity kind of unfolded for me over a period of time, probably over 60 days, this moment of, but at the beginning, it was like this. I realized that of course, I needed to get back out and get more alcohol and get more drugs, and that was always hard. It takes a lot of energy, and I didn't have anything to give me the energy to go out and do it. I normally kept something in reserve. There was nothing left. And then it hit me that it didn't matter. So I'm just going to run out again. I'm going to be right where I'm at. What I did was I hooked up a rope through a rafter in my basement, stood on a chair like that, kicked the chair out, and planned for this thing not to have to happen anymore. And I came to, curled up in a fetal position on the floor of a basement where this floor, the sewage would back up every 3-4 months and fill it up with 6-8 inches of sewer and slowly drain out. And I end up laying on that floor, trash everywhere. I'd broken all the windows at one point because I'd had a spirit visit me, and the spirit and I got in a little bit of a fight, and so I broke the windows to show the spirit. And so then of course I had a box. I had a box of like mail that's like 6 years worth of mail. And in the mail is that, the IRS notices, the bill collector notices, the attorney notices, court notices. At some point, I planned to get to it. I'd move that box around, but I never got to it until I got sober and did it in amends. And I came to, and I believe that was on September 6th. And what I ended up doing, I believe, was sleeping for a period of time. And September 11th, 2001, my ex-wife and her husband and they had my 2 kids, and then their other 4 kids. They had 4 kids. Were at my house, and 9/11 had happened, and they hadn't seen me for a while, and they were wondering if I was still alive. And they came and they got me, and they took me up to her house, and I detoxed at my ex-wife's house during that process, and I didn't have the power and I didn't have the will. I believe what happened to me was like Pat talked about it. I believe the grace stepped in front of that desire to drink and use anymore, and something happened, and I got to live and I got to be in that misery of what it's like to detox. I had detoxed before, but usually they give you drugs and stuff, and you're fine. This time, and when they tried to get me in this indigent detox in Colorado Springs that I had been to a couple times prior to that, once earlier that year, and it was full. And then they tried to get me to one in Denver, and it was full. And they tried a couple of these places where you would pay up in Colorado, and they were full. My youngest brother, Denny, had gone through a place down in Chandler, Arizona 4 years prior to that. And so I suspect they contacted Denny, and Denny got me into that place. So they put me on a twin prop and flew me down to Arizona. I couldn't fly commercial because I had 5 warrants, and after 9/11, it seemed like they weren't real excited about putting people on planes with warrants. And prior to that, they didn't care. But after that, and so I end up down there, and I get put in this place, and I've already detoxed, so I don't have to go through a detox protocol at this place, and they give me the outline of the rules, what I'm supposed to do, the chores I'm supposed to take, how I'm supposed to, the stuff I'm supposed to do. They give me a big book, a 12 and 12, and they assign me a spiritual counselor, and the spiritual counselor is going to supposedly take me through whatever I'm willing to do. And then they told me that the doors aren't locked. If I don't like the stuff, I'm welcome to leave. And that kind of shook me up. I don't know why that shook me up so much, because any place I was being put into at that time, I remember 48 arrests and probably 6 or 7 asylums. They weren't giving me unlocked doors. Those doors were always locked. They really didn't want you there, but they didn't want you to leave either. So, but this place, it seemed like they wanted me, but they said I'm welcome to leave. And I remember that just having for reflecting. That's like got me. So John L. was 27 years sober at the time. John's 48 years sober now. John takes me and 2 ladies in a room, and he asks us why we're there. And I described to him this experience with Jerry Garcia, the Grateful Dead. And he goes, man, you are full of crap. So you sit over here. And he takes me out of the circle, makes me sit on the side. And then the next lady shares about finding her dad dead on her basement floor when she was 13. And she describes the hopelessness and helplessness that comes along with alcoholism for a woman. And as she's telling her story, first of all, she grabbed me, and I connected with finding her dad dead on her basement floor when she was 13. Because that was the thought that was constantly going through my mind. My daughters at that time were 12 and 18. And she described the hopeless life of an alcoholic woman. She describes, what it was like, to have dreams and hopes, get married, have kids, have a career, get a beautiful house in San Diego, have all this, and then lose the husband, lose the career, lose the kids, end up homeless on the streets of San Diego, doing whatever she could do to get the next drink, the next hit, being beaten, being raped. And she described the stuff, and I realized that the only gift, I had an awakening was given to me, and this awakening was along the lines of, I don't believe I had the power to formulate this conceptually. I believe it was something that was given to me by grace. And that was that the only thing I was capable of doing, since I was no different than her and I was no different than the father she kept describing, was to give my daughters the same gift she had received from her dad, and that someday my daughters might be sitting in a chair telling the same kind of stories that she was telling. And I tell you, my oldest daughter was almost 8 years sober before she got drunk and loaded again, and she's coming up on 6 months. My youngest daughter is coming up on 4 years. She has the same sobriety date as Pat. But I wasn't ready to hear my oldest daughter's story. I wasn't ready to hear my oldest daughter, because I got to hear it about when she was about 4 years sober, and she told it down in Phoenix. And I wasn't ready to hear about my daughter being beaten, being raped, all that stuff that happens behind alcoholism. And while that lady told her story, something inside of me let go. And what let go of me was any idea that I could do this life on my own. And I didn't have any solution. I didn't know about the problem of alcoholism. I didn't have an idea of what the double-edged sword is, craving of the body and obsession of the mind. I didn't have any of that stuff. I didn't have a vocabulary to even talk about it. All I had was absolute despair and hopelessness. That stuff all comes later as I sit with you guys and I hear your guys' stories, and you start to give me a vocabulary by which I can articulate, these indescribable experiences. Bill Wright wrote in the big book, no words can describe the loneliness and despair I felt in that bitter morass of self-pity. Quicksand stretched in all directions. I realized in that moment that alcohol was my master, that there was nothing I could do, that alcohol always decided. Any of my plans were always going to be trumped by alcohol. There was nothing I could do about it. And the best I could do, the only gift I was capable of giving my daughters was the same gift she had gotten from her dad, and that was to be taken out of my basement in a body bag, maybe out of a jail cell, maybe taken down from a tree, because that's why I had thought about hanging myself there. And tears started to fall. And John grabbed my hand. John took me to another room. And in this room, I sat down with John, and on the wall was a Footprints poem. And I told John about this Footprints poem, what it meant to me, and how we had seen it on a quilt, and we had bought it for my oldest daughter, and how this quilt had sat at my house for years in a dry clean shrink wrap, and it never got used. And I would told him that I would open that closet door and I'd see this quilt with that Footprints poem on it, and I would think to myself, because sometimes the heat and the electricity would be turned off and be super cold, and I'd be absolutely miserable. I couldn't get anything. I was out of drugs and alcohol, and I'd be just shivering. I'd think to myself, I just wrapped up in this blanket, maybe I could get some comfort. And I never opened that thing. And yet here I am sitting in this room, and I see this and a prayer came out of me. And I don't believe I had the ability to create the prayer. I believe God gave me the prayer. And the prayer was, God, I don't know what to do. I'm screwed. That afternoon, a man came to the facility doing what he does on Thursdays. Doug's 38 years sober this week. And Doug came and he asked if any men wanted to go to a meeting with him. And I raised my hand along with 2 other men, and I went to a meeting with Doug in Tempe, Arizona. And at this meeting, I experienced the most cherished quality of AA, and that's that thing about unity. Because unity happens because there are people willing to sacrifice their ego and their self-interest for the purpose of why they're there, and that purpose is to carry a message to the still suffering alcoholic. And I experienced that kindness, and I experienced that love, and I experienced that kind of laughter that night. And I went back to the facility that night, put my head on the pillow, and I slept. The following Saturday, a man came to the facility dressed like I am. Sports coat, looking nice. Well, I have a suit. He had a sports coat on. Nicely pressed slacks, clean shoes, looking really sharp. Big, tall guy, Terry M. And by then, I'm about 10 days sober because I've already detoxed. I've been there for 2 days. And my capacity to judge was coming back. And, and it comes back strong always. And I'm judging Terry, and I'm wondering, what's this guy coming in to talk to us losers for on a Saturday morning? It was like 115 degrees in Chandler, Arizona, and he's dressed all nice like that. I'm thinking to myself, I wonder how much he's getting paid for this. I did a quick check. There's 36 people in the room, and I think he's probably getting $20 a head. He's probably walking out with $720 on it. That's better than the raffle earlier today. He's killing it. And that's what's going through my mind. And he gets up and goes, hi, my name's Terry. I'm an alcoholic. If you're out there wondering how much I'm getting paid for this, I might be here to talk to you. And he got me because I was wondering. So I knew he was reading my mind, and since I was psychotic, so I started paying attention. And he told his story, and he told the story of the hopeless alcoholic man, everything that happened to him. And as he told his story of what he was like, I connected with him. I knew what it was like to lose my wife. I knew what it was like to lose my kids, lose my career, lose my hopes and dreams. I knew what, and he described all that stuff. And he described seeing the little men climbing out of those vents, rappelling down to the floor. And I said, yeah, I know what he's talking about. And and not wanting to step on them, and because we're careful like that. and my heart connected with Terry's heart. Terry's alcoholism touched my alcoholism. My brokenness was touched by Terry's brokenness. And then he had more to talk about because Terry was 10 years sober, and he talked about what had happened to him, how he had been sitting in that same place that we were sitting in, and how he had come in there and he started to do this stuff. How he started to go to the meetings, how he started to hear something in these meetings, and how he started to relate to that stuff, and he started to believe what you were saying, that you weren't just blowing smoke. And then how he ended up getting a sponsor, and how the sponsor took him through this big book and showed him how this spiritual program of action works and how to take these actions. And he said as he did these things, and he got himself a home group, and he got some service commitments, started sponsoring guys, how his life started to be pieced back together, and how his heart started to feel whole again. And I believed what Terry talked about. And I made a decision while he was telling us, I'm going to do whatever it was Terry was talking about. I didn't know anything else to do. And I believe God gave me the grace to know that decision. I don't believe I had the ability to come up with that on my own. I believe it was just grace that gave me. And I believe that's how grace has worked for me the whole time, is that grace gives me the moment of clarity, the awareness of what it is in that moment that I should do. And it also gives me an inkling of the courage necessary to do it. But my job is to participate with that grace, and be able and do the things and just trust what's going to happen. And the best way I can participate with grace is gratitude. And I can't be grateful for everything. In fact, I guess I can, but I personally can't. But I can be grateful all the time because I'm sober today. And I'm sober today based on what I believe is a miracle. And I believe that's what Alcoholics Anonymous is. It's a conduit of miracles. It's a conduit of grace, that we sit with each other. And we do this thing so that we each might have this kind of experience. And we don't all do it perfectly. Our book says no one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. We just do this. But what binds us is that we're on the common journey. We're all drawn to make a little bit of progress every day along spiritual lines. And you give me these tools. You give me this process of recovery, unity, service. Unity is this thing where we're together, and we're together based on some spiritual principles we call traditions. And those traditions allow me to accept an invitation to set aside for a moment, for the time I'm with you guys, a bit of my ego, a bit of my self-centeredness, so that I might have an experience of being with you free of that for a moment. You know, I don't have to know everything. Tradition 2 says that our ultimate authority, God's going to express himself through our group conscience. It's my job to be informed, and it's my job to participate in that group conscience. But I don't have to have the final say. And for somebody who has to have the final say on everything, there's some real freedom in that. And I can go through all the traditions along that same way. You know, Tradition 3 is a really good one. The only requirement for membership is the desire to stop drinking. Well, without that invitation to set aside my ego interests, my self-centeredness about what I'll do as a person walks in the door, and I'm immediately thinking, does that person need to be here? I'm not sure. Then I'll start paying attention to what they're saying. No, he doesn't. He probably should leave. Or, yeah, that person needs to be here. You know, and so what ends up happening is my mind does its job, and I start separating myself from you guys. And the second I start separating myself from you, and then it starts to get uncomfortable, at least painful. And if I don't, the most important thing I've discovered for me to have my ideals grounded in a power greater than myself is to be with you, to be on this journey with you guys. And there's maybe people that are allowed to have the spiritual experience by going to the mountaintop, maybe retiring to the desert. That's not my experience as an alcoholic. There's something about being with people that I've always craved. You know, whether drinking or not drinking, it's about the people. But there's also something about people that I can't deal with. You know, that because people do stuff that, and they look a certain way, and so I'll decide what it is they're thinking, and because I'm a mind reader, and pretty soon I'm not trusting what you're doing, and I'm pretty angry about what you're thinking, and then I'm full of shame about myself about what I'm thinking about doing to you, and if I don't treat this thing through this process that you give me that's called the steps, I'm going to think myself right out of the solution that I need. Because there's something that happens for me. I've got about 10 minutes, and so I left that place, and they had suggested that I go to California to stay in a more structured environment. And I looked at some brochures, and I saw one with like sailboats and a marina, and I'm thinking to myself, oh yeah, I like that one. Me and the inner child want to go there. And so they set me up, and I go to this halfway house, and it's full of criminals, and I end up in this place, and there's 4 bedrooms and 16 people, and it's not by that marina, but it was exactly where I needed to be. So I get in there, I get my bunk. I'm on a top bunk because I haven't been there long enough, and before leaving there, I had asked for for names of people I might contact when I got out to California. So I came out here armed with some names on a little notebook that I would carry around with me. I would write notes about what you guys say, and I would just do this stuff because there was something happening to me. I was becoming on fire for this thing. I'm somebody who I can honestly say I've never been to a bad meeting. I've had bad moments in meetings, but never have I. It's always resolved. It's always gotten to a place, and that's been my experience. I know that's not everybody's experience. Not everybody's, but you know, I've found God in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. Howard used to say this thing. He says when you have an experience of God, return to that place and sit there. And I found God in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, and this is where I come back and I sit, and I continue to experience that stuff. Anyway, I've got these names on this pocket-sized big book, and I go to Dana Point, California, and they take me to a meeting in San Clemente on a Wednesday night, and I've now got a little over 30 days, and I've got purpose. I've got a little bit of sanity, and I've got purpose, and my purpose now is to fix this damn meeting because it's not being done right. They're not doing it like they're doing in Arizona, and I've got all these thoughts going on about how this is supposed to happen. And the first man that shares says, hello, my name is David B., and David used his full name, and I recognize the name. And I look back, and I'm thinking, he got this very distinctive James Earl Jones voice, and I look back, and I see this old black man, and I don't recognize the man, and I don't recognize the voice, but I recognize the name, and I'm thinking, how do I know that name? And I pulled out that pocket-sized big, and there was a name, David Booth, there. And after the meeting, I went up to David. I said, David, is your phone number 949-768-3791? And David said, why, yes, it is. And I asked David to be my sponsor that night. David was my sponsor up to the time he died. He died early last year, and while he was dying, I got a new sponsor, Ralph W., because in the midst of David's dying, I encountered something, and that was the same kind of anger that I had in my dad when he was dying. This kind of sense like they're doing it wrong. You know, the doctors told them to do something. Why don't they do what the doctors tell them to do? I became very self-righteous about things, and I needed to talk to him. So I asked Ralph, and Ralph's been my sponsor since. And so I'm very grateful for that. I've not been unsponsored. Ralph made that a point the other day. He says that Tom asked me while this sponsor was dying, because something about him knew he couldn't be unsponsored. And it's not that I believe that one of the things I did in sobriety is I came up here. I've been up here a lot. I came up to Pacifica, and I got a master's in the mythological studies program, looked at from the lens of depth psychology, which is kind of the psychology of Carl Jung, which is, Carl Jung would be considered, Bill wrote him as one of the cornerstones of the AA program. And one of my favorite stories is the Divine Comedy by Dante. And Dante is sponsored in his journey. He's got 3 different sponsors. He got the first sponsor is Virgil, the poet Virgil, the Roman poet Virgil. And he takes him through Inferno, the depths of hell, and he brings him into purgatory up until the level where he finally meets Beatrice. Beatrice is kind of like the archetype of love, and Beatrice takes him to Saint Bernard. Saint Bernard takes them to the final heights of heaven. And we do the same kind of thing. At some point, David served as my Virgil. He walked me through all this stuff so I could start to get a vocabulary to start to communicate what was going on in myself and start to have an experience. What David did for me was he gave me the tools to ground my ideals in a power greater than myself, just like your logo has there with the circle and triangle. Unity, recovery, and service. And when I have that as an image about who I'm supposed to be in life, through that process, my ideals get grounded in a power. I don't get my ideals grounded in a power greater than myself because I read a daily meditation or because I go to church service or because I listen to you guys. I get my ideals grounded in power greater than myself through action, but it's kind of a pragmatic, specific action. And the part of the specific action is this process of recovery, where I go through a process where I start to recognize I'm hopeless, step 1, there's a problem, step 2, and I do the work necessary to realize the promise of step 12, spiritual awakening. And where that's grounded in is I take a perspective that there's some kind of power at the center of the universe, and it's not me. And I need to have a relationship with it. And how I get that relationship is through the rest of the steps. I start some inventory. I share with another person. I struggle with my defects. I make amends. I start to have a regular daily practice of looking at who I am and what's going on in my life. When I was 6 months sober, I turned myself into the state of Colorado dealing with those warrants. And I would turn myself in what I thought was going to be the easiest case. It was DUI number 6. But I had already pled guilty with the stipulation that I'd do 7 days. And the 7 days came because the equipment that they used for the testing was faulty and other people were beating the cases. So they gave me an easy deal. Otherwise, I'd have been locked up for a while. So I went back and I turned myself in thinking I'm going to do 7 days. And the judge sees me, says, takes that stipulation, rips it up, says, this doesn't work for me. I'm going to sentence you to the maximum I can sentence you to, and that was a year. And I'm going to put you in a maximum security facility because you got these other cases that are felonies that you need to deal with, and I don't want to lose you. And so I get locked up in a maximum security facility at 6 months sober, doing my 9th step. And on day 6, I'm just bummed. I'm thinking to myself, what, God? This isn't where you do 12-step work, locked up, solitary confinement. And I prayed, and I said, God, just give me a sign I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And the next morning, the door swings open. It's a chaplain. He throws a Bible in. I say, not a big Bible guy. And he throws a meditation book in. And I read the meditation. It said, read Romans 12:14. So I open the Bible. I read Romans 12:14. It says, bless those that persecute you. Bless them and do not curse. Well, I had not been blessing those that I've been doing the opposite. It said, bless them and do not. Give up your conceit and be with people of low position. This is what I read after I had prayed the night before. It said, holy crap, there's lots of people of low position in this place. Including me. And so I got my attention. I read the next verse above. It said, the authorities are in place to carry out my will. Give honor where honor is due and respect. And something happened to me. At 6 months sober, actively doing this process, turning myself into the state of Colorado, doing the 9th step because I wanted to get connected. I wanted to get free. How free do you want to be? I wanted to be free. And I knew I wasn't free when I'm walking around having to look over my shoulder all the time with all these warrants. And I'm sitting in that place, and I got more free than I'd ever been in my life because I got a sense of peace filled me, a sense of courage, a sense of belonging, a sense of rightness, knowing that I was right exactly where God needed me to be. And so what ended up after that is I started just, I was locked up 23 hours a day for the first month. I would do a lot of meditations, and I would send out kites for books, and I'd get books about God from different perspectives. I read 123 books about God from, Hindu perspective, Islamic perspective, Jewish perspective, Christian perspective, Buddhist perspective, all these different things, and about how to meditate. And that became my practice. And then I get out, and I hear Howard talking about, step 11, self-examination, prayer, and meditation. Each on their own provide great benefit, but when they are logically related and interwoven, the result is an unshakable foundation for living. And I've had that experience. And so I sit in that process, and every morning I do my meditation. I'll get to a point at some point where I have that same kind of feeling where I had in that jail, where I had that sense of freedom. And it's only fleeting, and it's not always available, but I know it's there. And out of that comes something. Out of that comes this third legacy we have, this service legacy, where Bill wrote that, when the 12 steps is seen in its full implication, what we're really talking about is love that's beyond price. When the gratitude comes up, if I don't give it back to you guys in the form of service, it's going to disappear. And then pretty soon my thinking is going to take over, and and then the grace will just disappear. My job today is to continue to do this thing. I remember we used to have a meeting down where we lived on Saturday nights. It was called it was at St. Edward's Church. And the reading they would do at the end of the meeting was the St. Francis prayer. And I remember sitting with this long-time sober lady, and they said the prayer together, and we were standing up and holding hands, and she whispered under her breath, says, "Oh, I want to be that when I grow up." That's the thing I want to be when I grow up. I'm going to close with this. Chris talked yesterday, and he talked about his experience of being locked up. And then when I've got a grandson right now. I've got 6 grandkids, but my 19-year-old grandson is locked up in a facility in Casper, Wyoming. He's done some crazy stuff, and now he's locked up for it. And I talk to him a couple times a week, and on Sundays I do a video chat with him. And this past Friday, I had a conversation with him, and here's what Chris said yesterday. He talked about, there was a point in my life where I just wanted to go home. I just wanted my mom. Those were the very words Jay said to me on Friday. He says, "I just want to go home. I miss my mom." I think that's what God is for us. God hears that part of us. We have that cry to him. I just miss my home. I just want to go home. I miss my mom. I miss my dad, whatever it is. And in Alcoholics Anonymous, we get to give voice to that. And we get to put flesh on that thing. And then we get to be there. And God gives us the next best thing. We get to be with each other. And that's the home we're going to be in until another place comes. And we get to go to the big meeting where so many of my heroes today are the people who die with long-term sobriety, with a chip in their hand, with grace in their heart, and with the knowledge that they've done their little bit, to make this place a little better. And I appreciate the opportunity to participate in that with you guys. Thanks.